This is The Check-In. I'm Janet Saidi. Thanks for checking in with us today. One of the most talked about books of the summer is Raven Leilani's debut novel, Luster, and it has a Missouri connection, at least for today, because Ms. Leilani will be in conversation with Skylark Books Bookshop in an event tonight. And she's agreed to check in with us to talk about the story told in her novel, Luster. It's the story of Edie, narrating the honest, surprising journey of a young woman navigating all the things work, life, sex, and most importantly, art. And it's also about much more than that, which we will explore right now with Raven Leilani. Welcome to the Check-In, Raven.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure because I just have to say, this isn't always the case. I know you've done a lot of interviews, but um, I'm lucky in that all of us that are in journalism and public radio, that sometimes we get to interview novelists that we've read, but this happened super quickly. I literally finished your book, put it on the kitchen table, and then saw that you were at Skylark, and
Oh,
was really,
incredible.
really excited that you were able to come on right now. So usually it's sort of years after I've read someone but I feel like I just met you through your book, and now you're on the check-in. So welcome. So and the
Thank
book
you.
is getting a lot of attention. I think I heard about it somewhere, picked it up, and then it arrived. Write-ups about it arrived in my New Yorker this issue. I think my Sunday Times this week also had it in there. Let me ask how all of this attention, because it's your first novel, how is it changing your
Yes.
life right now?
It has completely changed my life. I will say, maybe about a month ago when we were about to head into this, I got a really beautiful letter from a writer I hadn't met before. And he said, "You may know this already, but your life is about to change."
Mm-hmm.
And I read that letter and I was like, is that true? And
Yeah.
a week later, it kind of started to dawn on me. You mentioned finding me in the New Yorker, and it was absolutely wild to kind of open my issue because I get them. They just come in and I put them on my coffee table, and
Uh,
this one came in. I it was absolutely surreal to open it and see my book, and it has been the reception too has been incredibly warming,
mm,
especially in this moment, when
mm,
there's so much going on.
mm.
Uh, I think that I used to work in publishing, so I have very managed expectations around what it would be to publish a
Yes.
book, especially publishing in a climate like this. And so I'm just really thankful that people are, they care about the book, that it's connecting with people. It's really a dream.
Well, that is really great to hear because I know that, if I got my New Yorker and suddenly found myself in it, I think I would find that terrifying. So, but like you said, you've navigated this stuff. You've worked in publishing. You knew, even though it was your first novel, and you're not an old person, but you knew what you were getting into. So that is really
Right.
great to hear, and really exciting. And I know also that you have slightly changed your name, which I think must really help, and I think is really advisable for authors
Yes.
out there. So let me talk about Luster. So it's a really, it's been called all these things, and it's really tempting. I review books. Sometimes it's really tempting to bring up all the cliches, but it is a really intimate first-person narrative of a young woman, Edie, who's navigating sexual politics, racial politics in the workplace and in relationships. But it is about so much more, which we would love to explore. But let me just first ask you, what drew you to create Edie's story?
So I'm in love with art. It was the very first
Hmm.
thing I ever loved. That was where I started. I started with painting, before I kind of put it aside and started writing more seriously. And so art creeps into pretty much everything I write. In the short fiction I wrote before this, the art was there, and this book was really my opportunity to have the page space to tell, a bigger and more complex story about what it is to try and lay claim to that art, especially if you're, a young Black woman.
Yes. And so Edie is a young Black woman, as you say, who's painting. You are a young Black woman who's also painting, but you are
Yeah.
also, you really do seem to approach your writing like a painter. Your sentences are really astonishingly original, I feel like, and it's funny because I would say they are keenly observed, which is a cliche that reviewers used. But I feel like after reading Luster, you should just use keenly observed and then retire that phrase forever because it is incredibly keenly observed. It's almost like you've taken a scene, an image, a person, and you kind of dismantle it and then put it back together, sort of the way a painter might do with portraits. But I know nothing about painting, but it seems like you do that with sentences. Let me just ask, since you brought up art and sentences, how do you craft your sentences? What goes into that?
I really appreciate you saying that, and I think there's an element of art making, at least in with painting, any sort of visual medium that requires a close degree of observation. And so I think because I was coming from that practice, that found its way onto the page. But also, I will say, language is really, really important to me. You know, the books that I gravitate to, they have like a kind of an energy to them, like an electricity on the sentence level. And the very first writing I fell in love with is poetry, which I think is very very focused on the language, very disciplined in its intent in the use of language. And I also too, like when I'm writing, I need to feel like it's fun.
Yes.
You know, the sign of a project that is maybe not the right project is it feels like drudgery. And if it feels like drudgery to you, then it absolutely does to the reader, right? And so I really wanted to create an experience where perhaps even in the language, a reader might feel that joy. You know, that was really important to me.
So it's interesting as you're writing about Edie, who, you know, we're talking about her as a painter. We're kind of getting straight to her story. But at first, her story seems to be about a young woman working in publishing who's basically having a lot of sex. And if you read a lot of the write-ups about Luster, that is kind of what's front and center. But I feel like your novel kind of goes through a metamorphosis that Edie herself goes through. She is a young woman working in publishing, having a lot of sex, but she becomes a really strong artist. If it's okay for me to kind of land a spoiler there. But that is kind of what happens. The centering in your story changes from being kind of what like guys might like reading about to kind of being turned inside out and being about a young Black woman finding herself. And really two young Black women in this world emerge as the important characters with a capital C. Did you kind of intend to trick us into this kind of cool metamorphosis? Or did that just kind of happen naturally by you exploring and writing what you wanted to write about?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of, I never really know what a project is. I have to write to find it out. Writing for me is discovery. But I also, yes, on a craft level, you know, I wanted the book to have those two halves. You know, the half that is about, and I don't know if half is like the right word, you know, quadrant, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wanted the book to have the component that talks about art. It talks about the messiness of that trajectory when you were trying to pursue it, and what that looks like when the work is private, and you yourself have to kind of affirm your artistry and feel that private work is real. That the sex too is a part of the human story I wanted to tell in this book. A story about a woman who is seeking intimacy and seeking connection, and
Yes.
is very situated in her body. You know, there's so much drama, you know, about the body, and to me it would have felt like an omission, right, to leave out that drama, that part of living that is bodily. And Edie as a character is one that is deeply wanton. You know, I wanted to make room for that yearning and for that desire, which I think, you know, you also see in her art.
Yes, you do. And speaking of her yearning and desire, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are about feminism as a writer. Edie makes some, you know, in her yearning, she makes some distinctly some choices that we would consider distinctly unfeminist. But
Totally.
there's something very feminist about centering her journey and all of its contradictions and all of its needs, you know, which is very realistic. Is this something you think about, or do you simply just write experience as honestly as you can?
Um, so I guess I should be 100% honest and say that in those scenes specifically, in general, I feel like I cannot think about
Hmm.
sort of the reception or like
Hmm.
even really truly the political implications of what I'm writing until it's done. I have to feel a freedom to come to the to page, but there were definitely moments during those sections where I felt, oh no, is this unfeminist, right? Like that was a real preoccupation I had and a real responsibility I felt in depicting Edie's sexual agency. But ultimately, the way it kind of came out was, this is a woman who is asserting what she wants, and I want to allow her room to assert that agency. For me, feminism is making room and keeping an open mind for what desire looks like for women. And so, like you said, contradiction is the word, right? A
Yes.
human portrait holds all of those contradictions, and it was important for me to make room for that.
I think that's a whole conversation that really needs to be explored in our culture, and it takes a lot of courage to do it. And you're very much leading the way on that conversation, which is the contradictions of female desire, and it can fit right into feminism, but it doesn't always feel like it. So I'm very glad to know, though, Raven, that you're not, when you're writing those sex scenes, you're not thinking about Betty Friedan or
Yeah.
Shirley Chisholm or anyone else. Let me just say really quickly that you're checking into the check in with us today. We're talking with author Raven Leilani. Her book, Luster, tells the story of a young woman navigating her way through all the things in the world, but also finding herself. And it's about much more than that, and we're exploring what we can. So, another theme that you explore is that I think would be easily missed, Raven, is one that I think is one in a lot of great literature, which from Jane Austen, the Brontes, you've actually been compared in the New Yorker to Tolstoy and Anna Karenina. Edie emerges as someone who's searching for a home and then finds a home, and how sort of shelter influences her as an artist and allows her to make her art. Are you attracted as an artist also to this theme of seeking and needing shelter?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really, truly deeply relevant, I think, in general to the art making process, to having the means, to having an environment which sort of facilitates that, creation.
Hmm.
With Edie specifically, um, the impediments that are there that kind of preclude her ability to make art, they do have to do with like those fundamental survival questions. Can she pay rent? Can she pay her student loans? And does she have a place to live? Which I don't know. Perhaps this is a spoiler, right? But like that,
Hmm.
the movement of the book is it happens that way in part because she does lose
Yeah,
her where she lives.
yeah,
And when she does find shelter again, even though that shelter comes with its own complications,
yes.
suddenly, right, she can generate. And so I did want to talk about those survival questions as they relate to art, and I felt a real personal connection with that, because for me, and I think for a lot of people who are making anything, um, it is a real challenge to juggle work and art. The thing that allows you to live and eat, but that also perhaps kind of takes up the bandwidth that you would otherwise need to create.
Well,
And
yeah.
yeah,
No, no, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
no, so yeah, I mean that was a really important aspect of the book to me, which was her seeking out that shelter, which ultimately becomes an environment in which she, not without complication, can create.
Yeah, that's great. And sorry to interrupt there, but I was getting excited because I was just thinking that, you're kind of dramatizing this and making it literary, this struggle, this vulnerability that a lot of people are facing, especially right now.
Yeah,
And, I assume, Raven, that you wrote this story, Luster, pre-pandemic.
yeah,
And before the racial justice movements arose, before people were so as vulnerable, and these disparities actually in our
yeah.
culture and the vulnerability of people, and many of them artists, were so apparent to us. How do you think the pandemic and also awareness of racism are influencing how this story is being received and landing with people right now?
Well, I have noticed that, like, I'm starting to do. interviews, and like when you write a book, you cannot anticipate or predict the climate you'll release it into. And as far as the sort of reckoning we've had around racism and police brutality, those are, unfortunately, kind of those are old and familiar and ongoing problems.
Mm-hmm.
And when I wrote this book, I obviously I didn't know that I would be releasing it during a time when those, it would kind of beg those questions, in this way. But I wrote the book as a Black person who has moved through the world in a body that, with a hyper awareness that I am in a body that is imperiled,
Mm-hmm.
and that made its way almost naturally onto the page. And so there's an element of it where it just is an extension of my experience. And I needed in this story that is about art, and about longing to make room for that part, because Edie is a character, she is a Black woman. Her race and gender are relevant to the trajectory of pretty much all of her pursuits. But I would say, as a writer, you hope that when you release a book like this that does touch on these issues, you do not hope that it will be as relevant.
Yes.
It would be a wonderful thing if I could point to those sections in the book and those were distant. That was history.
Yes.
I would like to, I think we all would like to move to a place where we're not so, we're not necessarily reflecting what is actually happening right now and kind of all the time.
Absolutely. That makes sense. You did not want to be this on point exactly,
Right.
as you were writing it, but it at least it is probably helping to foster a conversation that's going on and a hunger that people have
Yeah.
to understand. You have a scene of police brutality in this story. I haven't really I've not noticed anyone else bringing this up except for I think one reviewer who said, "Oh, it would have been good if this scene weren't in it. It wasn't necessary." And I was just a little astonished at that. But to me, the scene juxtaposes the security and even malaise of this quiet suburban home that Edie finds herself in, with another young Black girl who's been adopted by this family, or at least a foster child with the families. And so you have two young Black women in this suburban home, and it's juxtaposing that sort of quiet and the security that's feeding both of them, but also with the struggles and tragedies that are genuinely experienced by these two characters, Edie and the younger woman. And what are you hoping that readers see and experience through Edie in that juxtaposition?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's interesting. I think you move a character to the suburbs. The book is, you could almost call it in two halves. One part is in, the city in New York City, and second part is in a Jersey suburb. And the moment that Edie arrives, she feels the surveillance.
Yes.
And Akila, all but confirms that this is something she is aware of as well. And I wanted to talk about that, how quickly that surveillance becomes violent. We've seen the clips circulating, and I just wanted to talk about that. What that means, what that setting means, what those central problems are for a character who is Black.
Raven Leilani, thank you so much. You can hear our music telling us that it's time to wrap up, but I've enjoyed the conversation and wish you all the best. I wish you and your family health and happiness as you get through this pandemic. And we'll see you tonight at Skylark online.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, take care. That was Raven Leilani. She's the author of Luster. You can join her in an online book reading with Columbia's Skylark Bookshop tonight at 7. Go to skylarkbookshop.com to register for that. That's it for the check-in this week. I'm Janet Saidi. We will see you next Thursday, same time, same place.